Welcome back to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. My name's Chandler Fleming, and I'm the owner and lead therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling.
And I am Victoria Fleming, owner and therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling. And today, Chandler, our topic is?
Epistemology. Now that's quite the word.
It's a big word.
Epistemology, in part, is like, what do we know and how do we know it?
So exactly how would you define epistemology?
According to the dictionary, it is defined as the study of knowledge and the methods to pursue knowledge. So again, it's sort of like, how do we know what we know? And, how do we know it?
Yeah, so how, just like how do we gather our information and maybe assimilate and make sense of it?
Sure.
Okay, so what are some primary ways that we assess what we know?
Okay, so we looked at three kind of special ways. One is sort of by consensus or definitional. Some examples of that would be 1 + 1 is 2. A car is a car. Why is a car a car? Because that's what we call that thing. The capital of Michigan is Lansing. So we kind of learn these facts, and we know them because we learn the facts.
Right.
The second part is experience and feeling.
Or intuition, maybe.
Yeah, some intuition. It's some things that we perceive, our experiences. So intuition, it's hot or cold. How do we know it's hot or cold? Or something is dangerous. Or subjects like women are more nurturing. Do we know that? Do we think we know that? Do we experience that? Is that a feeling? And then the last one is faith and probability. My brakes will work. Well, how do I know my brakes will work? It's kind of hard to tell. I'll get paid next week. Well, do you really know if you're going to get paid or not? There is a God. There is no God. Some of those things we base on our perceived experience, or we believe it on a certain level of faith. And a lot of things in life are kind of faith statements.
So it's kind of interesting. This would mean the families in which we grow up, the communities in which we live, would have an impact on how we make sense of the knowledge that we have, and it would affect the consensus, and it would affect how we experience and feel about things, as well as that faith part, that probability part. Would that be true?
Right, and I think a lot of times that faith or probability part is based on our experience. So if you said to somebody that most lawyers are crooks, and their father's a lawyer and is a really great guy, he may not believe that. If you were sued 15 times in your life, maybe you would believe that about lawyers.
And maybe not even 15 times. It could just be a couple or
just
one.
a couple times. So experience plays into that. And we tend to believe at a pretty strong level what we feel or what we sense.
Okay.
And we place a lot of credit in that. And we tend to generalize or overly generalize. So if a blonde girl treated me bad, all blondes are bad.
Right.
If I got robbed by a lawyer, all lawyers are bad. Sorry, lawyers, don't mean to be picking on you today. But
So it sounds definitely like there's room for error within this accommodating for information and stimuli in our lives. So where can it go wrong?
Well, there's a lot of areas that go wrong. All three types of thinking have the flaws in them. First of all, consensus can change and new information can emerge. So I like to mention that, Pluto was a planet, now it's a demi-planet?
No, dwarf planet.
It's now a dwarf planet. At one time, it's kind of hard to believe, we believed frogs came from mud. I find it somewhat humorous that in 1979, during the first Earth Day, everybody wore winter coats because it was to protest environmentally against the Earth getting cold and that the return of the Ice Age.
Right.
So that consensus has sort of changed.
A consensus of the world being flat. I mean, really and truly, there was a time where it was believed we could sail right off the edge of the Earth, and that was the consensus, that the Earth was flat. So that ended up being shown to be wrong. So in that way, consensus is fallible.
Sure. And new information enters in. When we talk about the smallest particle, over the last 100 years, that's really gotten quite a bit smaller. We used to think atoms were the smallest, and then protons and neutrons, and then quarks, and now we talk about subquarks. So we keep finding smaller and smaller things, so all that information changes. The consensus changes, and the facts change. So are facts really facts if they change? well, the facts of the moment, I guess.
Right, which means also that those other two areas of experience and probability can be impacted. What would be some examples there?
Sure. So I think experience and probability is the biggest one because those things change more rapidly, sometimes with new information and sometimes just time to think about it. I can think of times that, I walk past the mirror and I go, wow, I look really good. Then I walk back across the mirror and it's like, ooh, I'm balding more, or, I really need to shave, or things along those lines.
Right.
So really rapidly, that assessment of how I look can change really, really quick. And other things could be things that I'm angry about. Oh, I'm so angry. And then over time, yeah, that really wasn't that bad, or I understand that. And then other people's experience. So I may say, it's really cold in here. And the other person will say, really, I'm kind of hot.
Right.
So it kind of begs the question of compared to what, because sometimes our experience and our feelings are sort of in a comparison to something.
Right.
So that makes it fallible. That's probably the most fallible. And then the last one is the probability thing. Things that are not very probable do occur.
Right.
Unfortunately, fortunately, it's not very probable I'll get in a car accident today. But I might.
Right.
So it changes the probability.
Right, which means a person's assimilation of information is having to kind of shift and change according to those experiences, according to probability.
Yeah.
And so the reason this becomes very important in regards to mental health is what?
Well, I think sometimes we get left with the feeling of, do we know nothing? And I think sometimes we don't know for certain 100% anything. Although we do know, based on probability and experience and so forth, that it mainly works. We know where we live, and we manage to make it home most days. Well, every day for me.
Yeah. So far, me too.
There is a shared experience about things. So most of the time, even things that are very subjective. So I go to a movie. Most of the time when I like a movie, other people like the movie. 1 + 1 still equals 2 until something changes. And we normally know when we're hungry.
Right. Although it's been shown that sometimes hunger is really just thirst.
Yeah.
And that very often we can tend to eat when we really just need to drink a big tall glass of water.
Right.
And satisfy.
So although we don't fully know everything, and that's very important to recognize that what we think we know, we don't truly know, and that we have to be able to challenge it. So one area is ambiguous stimuli. Can you define ambiguous stimuli?
Actually, it's interesting. When I was looking over the slides, I was thinking about there's a situation where I saw this hawk, and this beautiful, majestic hawk went flying down and then flew back up to the branch, and then I noticed he flew back down again and then flew back up to the branch, and then suddenly these feathers are being thrown down on my car. And I was talking with my sister, and it's so ambiguous in that, like, I'm seeing some information and I'm starting to make some conclusions. So I'm telling my sister, gosh, this hawk must have bird mites, or there must be a rash. There's something wrong with this hawk because this hawk is plucking himself senseless.
Okay.
But then the talon came up, and guess what he was doing?
He was eating.
He was plucking his dinner. He was
Awesome.
plucking his dinner. And so for me, it was like if it had stayed where he had never lifted, how I interpreted it was entirely wrong.
Sure.
So would that be a good example of ambiguous stimuli and how we make assumptions?
Yeah, we make assumptions, or we really don't know the meaning of things. I remember one time, and I use this story often, that I was driving down the road and somebody cut me off, and the person sitting next to me had a lot of expletives to say about him and how this person was less than a quality human being. And when we talked about it, I asked him, so what do you think it is? Oh, it must be some teenage girl texting. I said, well, did you see them? Well, no. I said, well, what if it's like a baby in the back seat and the husband's away at war and the mom is really, really tired and she just reached back momentarily to get the bottle to give it to the baby? He goes, well, you don't know that's true. I said, well, you don't know yours is true either.
Right.
But his interpretation, what he chose to believe about it, really shaped how he felt. And what I chose to believe, which is probably not the case, but I chose to believe that it was just a average person who made a foolish mistake, and that there was no stupidity involved and no really bad feelings, no bad character involved with them, that the meaning really changed things. So
And what becomes incredibly important about that is you were not angry, whereas your...
Yeah, my friend was angry and upset by it. And I think it's important for us to recognize that there's a lot of things that we bring in history and that we add meaning to when we really don't know, that lack of knowledge of where it comes from.
We don't have all the information. Yeah. Okay, so what's another aspect? Ambiguous stimuli, and then what?
Irrational thoughts. And sometimes the more irrational, the more easy it is for us to find. I have worked a little bit with women who suffer with anorexia nervosa, and they weigh 92 pounds and they're 5'8", and they say, you know what, I really feel like I'm fat. And sometimes you'll ask them, can you show me? And they'll point to areas of their body that they're emaciated. I've worked a lot with people who were had some serious thought disorders, schizophrenia and things like that, and there was a level at which some of them could say, I know there's not little green men in my room, but I really think there might be little green men in my room. And then to a lesser extent, depression and anxiety tend to be irrational thoughts. They tend to be beliefs that are not culturally held, and the interpretation are different than the average public.
And that can be hard to hear, because for someone who's struggling with depression or struggling with anxiety, it feels so real.
Right.
So as we look at how we can assimilate our information in a different way, how we can perhaps interpret ambiguous stimuli in a different way, and shift those irrational thoughts to more rational thoughts so that we can be healthier, what are some tips? What are some things that we can do?
Well, I think there's a lot of things we should do. I think we have the ability to choose our feeling. And that's really important. Once you recognize that you have that ability, that you're not a victim to your feelings, but that it's something that you can choose. And that's very, very important. And there are many things that create our feelings. Sometimes how much sleep we have, or how much food we had. Are we sick or not sick? But the largest ingredient in that is the choices that we make.
Right. So that made me think about your mother. Okay. I can remember after your father had died, and she was depressed, and there's every reason to be depressed, and the grief was pretty overwhelming. And yet something that she did that has still to this day stayed with me is each day she would think, normal is as normal does. And I don't feel normal, but I'm going to make a choice today. So today I'm going to get out of bed and I'm going to take a shower, and I'm going to, fry an egg. And even if that's all I do today, normal is as normal does, and I'm going to choose to take one step at a time to try to achieve a greater health in the midst of it.
And it's strange, but one of the most interesting areas of psychiatry today is neural pathways. It's those nerve cells themselves getting stronger, and the neurons and the axioms firing in a way based on our choices. Our thinking oftentimes is a habit. And when we change the way we think about things, we automatically start to think in a new pattern, and it becomes easier to think that way.
And what's so interesting is now with the technology that we have, they're actually able to do brain scans and show those neuropathways. And I know that there was a study done where they were able to clearly show negative pathways. And how once the person was trained to change that pathway, that the scan showed change. It was no longer a negative constant. It became change, and it became different. And I think that's so exciting that we can choose differently and we can impact how we think.
And it's interesting with a lot of my clients, when they recognize that choice plays a major role in how they feel, it's really confusing for them, because we want to trust our feelings, and to say that sometimes, frequently, the way we feel is wrong or is a matter of our choice can be difficult. But once they get past that, and it's very freeing, they recognize they play a role in how they feel.
And it's what I know you say very often is emotions are supposed to be indicators
Right.
and not dictators. And I think it's confusing at first because the reality is for so many of us, it feels like a dictator.
Yep.
You know, that anger, that anxiety, or that sadness doesn't just feel like an indicator. It feels like it's real, as tangible as this table, but that's just not the case.
Yeah.
You know, so let's do shift into what are some ways that we can change those neural pathways? What are some ways that we can choose healthier?
Right. And this is a little bit of repeating, but it's very important. It reminds me of step one in AA. In step one in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, is you admit that you're powerless. Step one in changing your thought process is admitting that it can be flawed, that those feelings are just indicators and that we're not controlled by those feelings. And what helps us is that we look back on times that our feelings do change rapidly. Once we're convinced that, yes, my feelings are just indicators and there are other explanations, it helps a lot. And then, so when we go to the next step, which is look for other explanations, we're much more willing and able to see what those explanations are. And then the other part of that too is just taking a break. Oftentimes in the moment, our thoughts kind of get derailed. We're kind of on the wrong pathway. And over time, we find that when the brain settles down, our thoughts on things can change quite a bit.
And I think what's interesting too is I can think of an example just recently where the anger was pretty intense on my part, and it was a silly situation, but it was a scary situation. It was on one of those super snowy days where you can't really see the road, can't see what's what, and I legitimately thought the person had cut me off. And so I'm already scared because I don't know if I'm going to slide. I think this person, and I didn't do anything mean. I probably gave like a scared, like kind of mad look. And as I turned, said something not so nice. No one in the car, just me, but I was like, ooh. And then I was able to laugh. I mean, I went from that intense, like I'm scared, angry, and I could have camped there, but then I laughed and I thought, okay, silly, and I moved on. And then that's, I think, where we have to start learning is I may not be able to always stop that initial, I'm so mad, but I can not let it dictate for as long.
Sure.
And I can be like, okay, not a big deal, deep breath, move on, next thing.
You know, and the meaning of things change over time. Probably the two best things that happened in my career came out of things that initially appeared to be negative, and they're the best things that ever happened to me.
How so?
I went from careers that I didn't enjoy to careers that I enjoyed much more, that were much more financially lucrative and rewarding, but it didn't seem like it was a good move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes a door closed and we don't see the door in front of us that may open can leave us feeling very intimidated, but once we press in, it can be very positive.
It's also really important if we're going to change our thinking is look for the positive, that almost everything has a positive side to it. And, you know, even, my dad dying of cancer, the positive side of that is I believe he's in heaven. He's no longer suffering. There was less of a burden for his care. And does that justify or outweigh the negative sides? No. But there is a positive side, and if I just focus on the negative side, I lose track of the positive.
Mm-hmm. Well, the reality is, even with my scary car situation, yeah, it was scary, but the positive is neither one of us hit each other. We were both safe, and I made it through. I made it safely to where I needed to go.
Right. Some other tools to use is what I call the magic twos, and I talk about it a lot on the show. But just asking yourself, will this really matter in 2 minutes? Will it matter in 2 hours, 2 days? Many, many things that we get really upset over. 2 minutes later, they don't matter. Sometimes somebody cutting you off, going down the road, 2 minutes later, you can't even remember what took place. You move on. Mm-hmm. The other thing, too, is putting things in perspective, and scaling does that, or just developing a scale. How bad is it really, and compared to who? I drive a clunker car. Well, that's kind of a bummer to drive a clunker, but there's billions of people in the United States, in the world, who don't have a car. Mm-hmm. So who am I comparing it to?
Good point.
And how bad of a clunker is my clunker? Mm-hmm. So, sometimes what's a clunker to me may be the best car ever to somebody getting their first car. Mm-hmm. So kind of knowing what that comparison is, who you're comparing yourself to. Mm-hmm. Again, along those same lines, I'm so poor. Well, compared to who? An American in the world today, I wouldn't want to be poor, but we're richer than most people in the whole world. We're richer than a lot of people throughout history. The vast majority of us have heat and clean water and a reasonable amount of food. So who are we comparing ourselves to?
And I think that's important, is to whom are we comparing ourselves? Because we have this terrible tendency to compare ourselves to someone who has it all.
Yep.
You know, the millionaire, the billionaire, instead of having a more realistic comparison. And really, comparing doesn't accomplish much positive anyway.
Sure. So there's some other tools too, which is just taking time for an attitude of gratitude, noticing those good things that exist, and noticing that being thankful for what we have is very, very beneficial, both from a biological standpoint and just an attitude way. And then the last one I kind of want to leave with to sum everything up is sometimes we just need to take time for distraction. So we need to focus on the positive, but also try to come up with some just beautiful images. So I went to the internet, and I'm going to close out with these last 3 pictures. The first picture here, I think it's beautiful. It's a mountain setting, and sometimes we just need to take a break and imagine ourselves sitting in the grass there and hanging out and looking at the beautiful view. And the next picture here we have, I think is the river here, and I can imagine just sitting there. I like to eat food, so maybe sipping some grape juice or drinking some wine and listening to the water, and maybe even taking a nap on one of the rocks or
tubing. I remember summers.
No, I don't want to get in that water. That water looks cold to me. But I can imagine like throwing sticks in the water and just kind of watching them go down the river and float into the pool and things along those lines. And then the last one, I think a lot of people love to get away to the beach and sitting on the beach or collecting sand shells and just sitting in the
feeling
sand.
the sand squish, between your toes and hearing that wonderful surf.
So
it's beautiful.
We started off with just how do we know what we know? And we do place a lot of credit in our experience. But by using distraction and other tools and really focusing on the positive and recognizing that just because I feel this way doesn't make it real, and I have a choice on how I feel about things, can be huge in just a happy lifestyle and reducing anxiety, reducing stress.
Absolutely. So epistemology, how we know what we know, and we can shift some of that information and make it much more positive and healthy.
Yep.
It's
we
exciting.
can learn new things.
Yes, we can. So, thank you. This has been very informative.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. And if you have any questions, as always, you can go to our website, ClarkstonLighthouseCounseling.com, or check out our Facebook page. Also, you can give us a call at 248-245-1809. But thank you so much for watching. And as always, if you feel like you have questions or topics you want for us to address, I can get that out. Feel free to contact us, and we'll see what we can put together, and you may see your question on the air. Thank you much.
Have a good day.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.